After what is now being investigated as an act of terrorism, this is the aftermath. The damaged Torah scrolls are recovered from Adass Israel Synagogue.
This is the hardest thing I've seen all day. Indeed, it's probably the hardest thing I've seen since post 7 October.
For Executive Council of Australian Jewry President Daniel Aghion, this moment goes to the heart of the emotional and racial memory of Jews, when attacks against synagogues, schools, and businesses were unleashed in Nazi Germany.
I'm looking at a Jewish community in Melbourne pulling their sacred scrolls out of a destroyed building, burnt, in the same way that we saw 85 years ago. It starts me to worry that what comes next.
It's clear how fortunate those inside the Adass Israel Synagogue were to escape with their lives. This devastation will be repaired. The damage to the sense of security in Melbourne's Jewish community will be much harder to restore.
I've grown up here. I went to a Jewish school for my entire schooling. I've always gone to synagogue with my family. And as a child, there was very little security at these places because it simply wasn't needed. You know, the doors were open. People could come in like any other school or any other place of worship, but that's not our experience in 2024.
Over the weekend, messages of support were left from well-wishers from all religions and from all over Melbourne. It's been 3 days since someone broke through these windows, poured and spread petrol, and tried to burn this synagogue to the ground. The attack has renewed fears about the rise of anti-Semitism since October 7th last year. Today, word that Victoria Police are searching for 3 suspects who fled the scene, and the investigation is being upgraded.
I am very confident that we now have had an attack, a terrorist attack, on that synagogue, and that is why we are transitioning that as a terrorist incident to the Joint Counter-Terrorism Team for investigation.
Joint counter-terrorism teams include the best terrorism investigators in the country, and a JCTT investigation unlocks more powers, more capability and more intelligence.
Does Victoria Police surveil groups that could possibly be involved in this kind of activity?
Well, you're making an assumption there that we're aware of groups that are actually involved in that we're talking about a whole range of groups. All I will say is we continue to collect intelligence where it's appropriate and where it's lawful to do so.
With anti-Israel symbols a presence at pro-Palestine rallies in Melbourne since the Gaza war began, Victoria Premier Jacinta Allen said the state is now considering laws to restrict protests outside religious places of worship, such as synagogues, churches, and mosques. One of the things you hear often from the Jewish community is they just don't feel safe in Melbourne, and that feeling has been increasing since October 7th of last year. What are you doing to help the Jewish community feel like they can be safe in Melbourne like everyone else is?
Look, it is incredibly distressing that to see that since October 7th that we have seen communities here in Melbourne, around the country, around the globe, feel less safe. That is why there have been a range of actions. Victoria Police have been deploying Operation Park, which is looking at how to both maintain public order but also coordinate across a range of agencies instances of anti-Semitic behaviour.
And there was more on the anti-Semitism crackdown from Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Flanked by the heads of ASIO, the AFP and the Attorney General, he announced an initiative to address the threat nationally.
Today I can also announce that we have established AFP Special Operation Avalite for anti-Semitism. This is in response to the attack last Friday morning that is now the 3rd arson attack after the attack on Josh Byrne's electorate office and the Sydney Woollahra car incident.
ASIO Chief Mike Burgess said the national terrorism threat remains at probable and that the Melbourne attack appears to be the kind of incident ASIO had warned about.
Australia's security environment is volatile and unpredictable. Anti-authority beliefs continue to grow, grievances are spreading, provocative inflammatory language are being normalised.
We've experienced in Australia in the last year the highest level of anti-Semitism that I've experienced in my lifetime.
On Friday, congregation member Sam arrived as the flames in his synagogue were being extinguished.
Yes, some people are scared, and I get it, I understand them. It is scary and it is traumatizing. It's definitely not a fun thing to be in.
Today, he was back, but his usual late morning prayer will have to be somewhere else.
We want our place back. We want a place to come back and pray and be together with the whole community. That's the end goal. Just keep on doing what we're doing.
Jillian Segal is Australia's special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, appointed by Anthony Albanese in July. She joined me earlier. Jillian Segal, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you so much.
Can you just tell us how you responded when you first heard about the attack on the synagogue in Melbourne?
Well, I think my first response was utter shock, and I was quite upset that it had come to that situation. I have to say that the situation has been deteriorating, and so many in the community, including myself, were not absolutely surprised that something terrible like that had happened, but still waking up to it was a shock.
When did you first speak to the Prime Minister about it?
Well, I have been in touch with the Prime Minister through the weekend. On Saturday, as well as with Tony Burke and with the Attorney General. So I've been talking to them or communicating with them very much along the lines of what was now announced today, that something really needed to be done, and a joint police task force was a great first step.
And were you arguing for that? Did you have to persuade them that that was the right move?
Look, I didn't get any pushback, but on the other hand, obviously government's got to go through its right processes and have the Security Committee of Cabinet look at this. So I didn't get pushback, but I didn't get, oh yes, that's a great idea. Government sort of takes these things on. I'm an advisor, not a member of the government, and but they, I think, heard what I said, that time for action was now. The time for speaking had finished. And we needed to do something. And we needed to send a message to the community that the country was not going to take this as it had been situated previously. There had to be something done about it. And I was very comforted at the press conference that took place earlier today by the Commissioner, who said, and I just wanted to quote if I could, he said, "We will not tolerate crimes that undermine Australian security or our way of life." And I think that's the touchstone. It's not only security, but it's restoring our way of life.
Were you satisfied with the Prime Minister's public statements after the event on Friday?
Well, I think after the event on Friday, the Prime Minister came out with two very strong statements. And I don't think that you can fault them. But the time for statements, as I've conveyed, I think had finished. And it's important to have statements, but we also need action. And, when I went to Buenos Aires in the first couple of weeks after my appointment and met with the other envoys, Australia signed the global guidelines to fight anti-Semitism, as 56 other countries have. And one of the key things are leadership, strong statements, but action.
Do you think there has been enough leadership shown in Australia over the preceding months?
Well, I think clearly there has not been enough leadership across the board. I don't put it only at the hands of parliamentarians. I think when you have something like this happen in society, we need leaders to speak up everywhere. We need political leaders, we need leaders from universities, and I think it's taken them a long time to come to a realisation that they need to do more. But I'm pleased to say in the last few months I've been working very closely with the Vice-Chancellors, and they are taking action to try and ensure that a different situation greets Jewish students next year. But we need business leaders and we need other religious leaders. The whole community of leadership need to speak up.
Just to understand what you would have hoped for or would have wanted to hear from our political leadership, what is it that you weren't hearing from our political leaders in the preceding months?
Well, I wouldn't want to damn all leaders. Obviously, we've had some very strong statements and very strong condemnations. But I think the thing that has worried me the most is, although there have been political condemnations, we haven't seen the policing really be active. A lot of policing has been let's keep the peace. And basically, whatever's been going on, the Jewish community has been asked to stay away, to not make any concerns public, etc., at the situation. So I think that has had to change. And that's where I'm hoping this task force will bring about a changed approach to policing. What I also want to see is the task force have some advice or input from prosecutorial experts, whether it's the DPP or others, because we don't want just policing. We want to see actions brought in the courts to send messages that any behaviour that steps over the line will have consequences, and test our laws.
And just to be clear, do you see a direct correlation between people displaying insignia of Hamas or Hezbollah, as we've seen at demonstrations over the course of the preceding months, and the heinous attack that took place on the synagogue in Melbourne on Friday?
Oh, absolutely. I think that public displays supporting terrorists, public community marches where things are hurled about condemning Jews, condemning our society for what we believe in, they all lead to what we've seen happen in Melbourne. Because anti-Semitism is that virus, that hatred that goes through the community and that is then expressed in lots of different ways. And that's what we have to attack and stop.
Now, earlier when you were talking about the fact there have been some strong condemnations, obviously, over the preceding months, there have been stronger condemnations coming from the opposition. Are you faulting the government for not either making strong enough public statements condemning some of those things you're describing at the regular marches that we've seen, but also was there a failure to drive policing to arrest, charge, and then, of course, for those cases to be prosecuted against people displaying terrorist insignia?
Well, I think that no one can deny that we have not seen sufficient charges pressed and the laws tested. That has been a feature of so many incidents. And so that has, I think, sent the message that that kind of behaviour can be behaviour that is not punished.
And who do you... I beg your pardon, Jillian Segal. Who do you hold responsible for the failure to prosecute those cases?
Well, I think it's been a whole of society failure. I think it's police thinking that their mandate was to keep the peace. I think it's been, there is political will in terms of prosecutions as well, across the board. I'm not only talking federal, but I think state. And I think that there was a lack of realisation where this leads, despite the Jewish community advocating for greater prosecutions, greater utilisation of the laws of the land. And despite government passing new laws, I mean, full credit to government, both state and federal, that have passed new laws outlawing Nazi insignia. We've got the recent doxing laws. We need to test the laws. There's no use having laws on the books. We need to test them. And that's bringing police, prosecutors, government, and then the courts all together. Even when there have been some prosecutions, people have been, given good behaviour bonds or education.
So you want to see stronger penalties for people breaking those laws?
Yes, I want to see it all knitted up together, because that sends the message that this kind of behaviour is completely unacceptable.
Let me just pose one other question to you, because the head of ASIO today, Mike Burgess, gave a warning about the damaging effects of overly polarised language. Notwithstanding what you're describing, are you concerned that this event on Friday is being politicised and that there could be consequences for that?
Well, I don't know. I think it would be great if we dialed down the political side of things and we came together as a community now that we have this task force, and we tried to ensure that it worked and that it did send the right messages in terms of ensuring that the public understands that there are guardrails, and those guardrails have to be respected for our democracy to thrive and for everyone to feel safe. And the Jewish community, above all else, needs to now feel safe in this country because it's been a tough year for them. But we also need, if I can add, all of this needs to be wrapped around with some greater education about what anti-Semitism is.
Jillian Segal, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.